Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm going to read A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas. One Christmas was much like any other. In those years, around the Seatown corner, now out all the sounds except the distant speaking of the voices, I sometimes have a moment before sleep, but I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was sick. 6. All those Christmases rolled down towards the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stopped at the rim of the ice-edged fish-freezing waves, and I plunged my hand in the snow to bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into the wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays resting in the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out comes Mrs. Prothero and the fireman. It was on the afternoon on the day of the Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden, waiting for Cats and her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December in my memory, in the white as lapland, as though there was no reindeer, but there were cats, patient, cold, and callous. Our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Slink and long as jaguars and horrible whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slide and slither over the white back garden walls in their length-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined trappers from the Hudson Bay, off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green eyes of these monsters. The wise cats never appeared. We were still, so still. Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in our muffled silence of the eternal snow. Eternal, ever since Wednesday, that we would never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cries from her igloo at the bottom of the garden, or if we heard it all, it was to us like a far-off challenge of our new enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voices grew louder. Fire, cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with our snowballs in our arms toward the house, and the smoke indeed was pouring out the dining room, and the gong was bombing, and Mr. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. There was better than all the cats and whales standing in the wall in a row. We bounded in the house, laden with our snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who has always slept there after midday dinner with his newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacked the smoke with his slipper. "Call the fire brigade," Mrs. Prothero said as she beat the gong. "They won't be here, Mr. Prothero. It's Christmas." There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper and as though he was conducting. "Do something," he said. And we threw all our snowballs into the smoke, and I think we missed Mr. Prothero, and we ran out of the house to the phone box. "Let's call the police as well," said Jim, "and the ambulance. And Ernie Jenkins, he likes fire." But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engines came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. No one could have had a noisier Christmas Eve, and when the firemen turned off their hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and poured into them and peered in at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said, with the right thing always, just looked at the 3 firemen in the standing, shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolved snowballs, and she said, "Would you like something to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves and whales, and the birds of the color of the red flannel petticoats whisked past the hark-sharped hills, when we sang and waddled all night in days and caves that smelt like Sunday's afternoon in the damp front farmhouse parlors, and we chased through the jawbones of deacons, the English and the bears, before the motor cars, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse. And we rode the daft and happy hill bareback, and it snowed, but they were small boys saying, "It snowed last year too." I made a snowman and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea. But those were not the same snow, I said. Our snow was not only shaken from the whitewashed buckets from the sky, it was shawled out from the ground and swam and drifted in the arms and the hands and bud of the trees. Snow grew overnight off the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfathered moss. Minutely envied the walls and settled on the postman, opening the gate like a dumb thunderstorm of the white, torn Christmas cards. Were the postmen there too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses on the spread frozen feet, they crumpled up the doors and mittens of them manfully, but all the children could hear were the ringing of bells. You mean the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doors rang? I mean the bells that the children could hear were inside them. I could only hear the thunderstorm sometimes, never bells. There were church bells too. Inside them? No. In the black, snow-covered belfries, tugged by bishops and storks, and they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam with the powder of the ice-cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window with the weathered cock for Christmas on our fence. But back to postmen. They were just ordinary men, fond of walking in dogs and Christmas and snow. They knocked on the doors with the blue knuckles. Oz had got the black knockers. And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the white drifted porches and huffed and puffed and making ghosts with their breasts and jogging from foot to foot like small boys wanted to go. And then the presents. And the presents at the Christmas box, and the cold postman and the rose-nosed tugged down the tray, slithered run the chilly glittered hills. We went into the icebound boots like men of the mishmonger slab. We wagged like bags like frozen camel hum, dizzling turn the corner of the foot, and by God we were gone. Go back to the presents. They were useful presents engulfed of mufflers with the old couch days and mittens made by giant sloths, the zebra scarfs of the substance like silky gum. We could play tug-of-war down in the galoshes, binding tam o' shams like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies and baklavas for dictums of the head-shrinking tribes. From aunts who always wore wool next to their skin, there were mustache and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all. I had once little crocheted nose bag for my aunt now, alas, no longer whining with us, and picture books in which small boys, though warned and questioned not to do it, would skate on Farmer Gill's pond and did and drown, and the books would tell me everything about the wasp except why. Go on the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-colored jellies, babies and folded flags and false noses and caps and machines that punched tickets and rang bells and never a catapult once. But by mistaken, there was once explained a little hatchet and a celluloid duck that made, what you pressed it, a most unduckly sound, a mewing moo that an ambitious cow might make who wished to be like a cow. In a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, the sea, the animals any color I pleased, and still the dazzling blue sky sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds, hard-boiled toffee, fudge, and all sorts of crunchies, crash gold humbug, glaciers, marzipans, and buddy welshers from the Welsh, and troops from bright green soldiers who, when they could not fight, could always run, and snakes and families, and happy ladders and easy hobby games for the little engineers and complete instructions, oh, easy for Leonardo, and a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the walls with a stick and shake our pictures off the wall, and a packet of cigarettes you put in your mouth, and you stood in the corner of the street, and you waited for hours in vain for an old lady to scold you for smoking a cigarette, and then you would smirk and ate it, and then you had breakfast and under the balloons. There was uncles like in our house. There were always uncles at Christmas, the same uncles, and on the Christmas morning, the dog-disturbing whistles, the sugar fags that would scold swallow down the snooze of the little world, and finding a sway of dead birds on the white post by the deserted swings, perhaps a robin, all but one with the fires out, men and women waddling, scooping back in chapel and taproom noses and wind-baked cheeks, all albinos huffling with their stiff-backed, jarring feathers against the irregular snow. Mistletoe hung from the gas brackets from the front porches. There were sherry and walnuts and bottled beers and crackers from the desert spoons, and cats in their fur abouts watching the fires and the high-beat fires spat, all ready for chestnuts and mulling pokers. Some few men sat in the parlors around their collars, uncles almost certainly trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, returning them to their mouth, coughing, and then holding them out again as though waiting for the explosion. And some few aunts who, wanting in the kitchen, nor anything else for that matter, sat on the very edge of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break, like faded cups and saucers. Not many of those mornings trod the piling streets as old men wanting to falling brown, yellow-gloved, and this time of year would spat on the snow and would take on the Constitutional to the white bowling green and black, and he would take it wet on the fine Christmas day or the doomsday. Sometimes two hale young men with big pipes blazing like overcoats, the wind blow scars, would trundle unspeakably down the furlong sea to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes, who knows, to walk into the waves until nothing on them was left but the two curling smoke clouds of the unextinguishable briars. Then I would slap the dashing home, the gravy smell of dinners, the others, the bird smells of brandy, the pudding, the mince, the scolding on my noses, my nostrils. When out of the snow-colored side lane would come a boy, the spit of myself, with a pink-tipped cigarette in the violent past of a black-eyed, cocky as a bullfinch, wearing all to himself. I hated him on sight and sound, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off the fence of Christmas when he knew and a violet wink, but he put a whistle to his own mouth and blew it so stringently high, so exquisitely loud, that gobbled the fences, their cheek bulged with goose, would press against their tinsel windows in the long length of the white echoed street. For dinner had turkey and blazing pudding, and after dinner the uncles sat in front of the fire, loosening all the buttons and putting their long moist hands over their watch chains, moaning a little and slept. Mothers, aunts, and sisters scolded to and fro, bearing terrines, and Miss Bessie, who had always been frightened twice by the clockwork mouse, whimpered at the side pin, and had once had elderberry wine. The dogs were sick. Aunt Dozy had to have 3 aspirins, but Auntie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard singing like a big bosom thrush. I could blow up balloons to see how big they would get and pop, and then we would burst, which we all did. The uncles jumped and rumbled in the rich and heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins in the snow descent. I would sit among the festoon and the Chinese of the ship up the whirling bay, and then on the tea-covered uncles would be jolly, and the ice cake loomed in the center of the table with marbled grave. Aunt Hannah laced her tea with rum before it was only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now that we told with the fire as the gaslight bumbled like a diver. Ghosts would echo like owls in the long nights. Then I would dare not look at my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cuddy hole on the stairs where the gas meter tickled. And I remembered that we were singing carols once, and we wasn't shaving on the moon of the light of the flying trees, and at the end of the long darkness of the drive of the night, each of us afraid, each one of us holding stone in her hand in case of all the brave to say the word. The wind would go through the trees, make noise with the old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in the cave, and reach in the black bulk of our house. What shall we give them? Hark the herald? No, said Jack. Good cause Wenceslas. I count 3. 1, 2, 3, and we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-filled darkness round the house, and we occupied by no one we knew. We stood close enough together in the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, and in a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who had not spoken in a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, egg-shelled voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. When we stopped running, we were outside of our own house. The front door was looming. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. Perhaps it was a ghost, said Jim. Perhaps it was a troll, Dan said, who was always reading. Let's go in and see if there was any jelly left, said Jack, and we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, another uncle sang Drank's Drum. It was a very warm and little house. Auntie Hannah, who had gone to the parsnip blind, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she would sing Hearts with a Bird Nest, and everyone laughed again, and then I went to bed. Looking through the bedroom window out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights of the window, all of the houses of the hills, and hear the music rising above them, steady falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the closed and unholy dark, and then I slept. The end. And that was A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas. You can like it, you can hate it. Merry Christmas, everyone. Shit.